Breece Hall is poised for a bounce back season. We'll explain why next.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. You can also check me out over on the Locked On Cowboys podcast. And joining me today, as always, is Michael Fabiano. You can follow him on Twitter at Michael_Fabiano. You can also check out all of his great work over on SI. And on today's show, we're taking a look at 6 players who are poised for bounce back seasons after, let's say, somewhat disappointing 2024 campaigns. Fabs, let's talk about Breece Hall, a guy that you've pointed out you think is going to have a big year. Why do you think that's going to be the case?
Yeah, and before we get into it, happy belated Father's Day to all the great dads out there. So Breece Hall was never going to be as good last season as he was in 2023, and I wrote about that over at Sports Illustrated. And the reason why is down the stretch, Marcus, if you remember, he was getting a ton of targets out of the backfield, a ton of them. So I went back and looked at the data. In his first 8 games, he averaged 3.9 targets and 2.9 catches. Now, Zach Wilson, remember him, was mostly the quarterback. And then down the stretch, the Jets went to the dynamic duo of Trevor Siemian and Tim Boyle, who were dumping the ball off to the backs constantly as pass catchers. So Hall averaged nearly 7 targets a game and almost 6 catches a game. And so last season, who was the quarterback? Aaron Rodgers. He is not going to be a guy who's going to throw the ball to his running backs, especially when he has Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams in the offense. So Breece Hall was never going to be as good a pass catcher as he was statistically the year before. It just wasn't going to happen because different offense, different quarterback. And certainly when you go from Aaron Rodgers, who's going to throw the football downfield and target his wide receivers, and compare him to Trevor Siemian and Tim Boyle. I mean, come on, guys. Let's be real here. The Jets in 2025, they're going to run the ball, Marcus. They're going to run the football. And Justin Fields, he will throw to his running backs more than Rodgers. In fact,
Probably.
Last year, in the 6 games he started, he threw the ball to his running backs 21.1% of the time. That's 5th most among quarterbacks who started at least 6 games. Now, I'm not saying, Marcus, that he's going to be a running back 2. I don't even think he's going to be a running back 8 or 9 or 10, but he will be closer to a low RB1 than where he finished last season.
So I want to talk through this because this is somebody that I've struggled with in my dynasty leagues. I've actually traded him away multiple times this offseason. Let's talk about the positives. Like you mentioned the quarterback stuff. Fabs, how many times in NFL history have we seen a rushing quarterback help a running back because it's harder to defend? Like I think of, Chris Johnson and Vince Young or Michael Vick. Let's go back even a little further. Michael Vick with Warrick Dunn and TJ Duckett. Like when you have an athletic quarterback, it makes defenses have to play on their heels a little bit. And I fully expect that to be the case with the Jets. Would you agree? Like Breece Hall is just going to be way more efficient with Justin Fields under center.
100%. I mean, look at last year. I mean, even though they're superstars with Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley, sure. I mean, Barkley had one of his best seasons with a mobile quarterback. Mobile quarterbacks can often be the best friends of a backfield mate in terms of the running back. And you mentioned
look at every running back ever with Lamar Jackson, right?
Yeah, Lamar and Derrick Henry, that's pretty good too, right, brother?
Yeah.
So and Fields is a guy who will run with the football. In fact, because of his rushing chops, I think he's going to end up being one of the best bargains in fantasy drafts because he's not going until in redrafts round 9, round 10. I'd have to look at the data over in terms of dynasty, but he's still young. He's still 26 years old. And so he's still in the prime of his career. And Breece Hall is also in the prime of his career. And he's a very explosive running back. And I remember back when I was working at NFL Network, and I would talk to LaDainian Tomlinson, name drop, about some of the backs that he likes the best. And he was always very glowing in his reviews of Breece Hall.
So Breece Hall being drafted at the end of round 2 in startup drafts, right at about 23, 24 overall. Here's the part that has me concerned a little bit is, number one, going into a contract year. That actually, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he has a great season because of that. But what is his long-term outlook if he's not on the Jets? We can talk about that at a different time. But I also like Braylon Allen quite a bit, the running back that the Jets drafted on day 3 last year. I thought he showed a little bit as a rookie. And we've heard Aaron Glenn this offseason talk about how they want to use a more running back by committee approach. Obviously, Breece Hall is going to be the number one back in that committee. But could Braylon Allen get 7 to 9 touches a game and be just enough of a thorn in Breece Hall's side where he kind of caps the upside?
That is the concern. And I think that's the only concern. Nothing else is a concern for me when it comes to Breece Hall, except for the fact that maybe Braylon Allen does cap his ceiling a little bit. But like I said, I don't think that he had his ceiling season in 2023.
Probably.
I don't think Breece Hall will ever get back into the top 2 among running backs. But can he be a back-end RB1 for the next few years in his career? Even with Braylon Allen back there, I think he can.
I'm going to give you a guy real quick before we move on. I'm kind of in on Patrick Mahomes this year. I know Mahomes has been dreadful in fantasy leagues and dynasty leagues, and you can make a case that he's the most overrated asset in dynasty leagues.
I'll make that add.
Yeah, there's no doubt that he has been, right? But I wouldn't be surprised if this year's a little different, right? Because I do think he finally has the weapons. Rashee Rice coming back from injury. I think he's 24, 25 years old. He gives them a dynamic slot receiver. Xavier Worthy last year performed well as a wide receiver 1, but he's not going to have to do that this year because they have Rice back. And even someone like Hollywood Brown, who they brought back after he got hurt earlier in the year, I just think he provides a really nice floor as a wide receiver 3. And I just think this Chiefs offense is going to have to throw the ball more than they had in previous seasons. So I would not be surprised after the Chiefs got embarrassed in the Super Bowl if this is the season where Patrick Mahomes is like, you know what, guys, I'm still the best quarterback in the league. Let me show you.
Yeah, statistically, I just don't see it. I have been down on Mahomes for the last 2 years, and rightly so. He's no longer an elite fantasy quarterback. He hasn't been. The days of 50 touchdown passes and 5,000 passing yards are long gone. And while on paper, sure, yeah, I agree with you. The talent and the depth of talent could be the best that he's ever had in the NFL. But also that assumes that everything goes perfectly, right? So, and Travis Kelce is 36 years old. And
yeah, but I saw a picture. He's down 25 pounds, I guess is what he said.
Yeah, no, I hear you. He's also got that cool like 80s, 90s haircut like Joey Lawrence used to have and John Bon Jovi back in the day. And I actually used to sport that
there you go.
that look as well. I don't know. Maybe if I grow my hair out a little bit more, I'll be able to date somebody like Taylor Swift. Probably not. But I guess I just have a blind spot with Patrick Mahomes.
So do I.
The last couple of years, I don't dig him anymore. I don't think, like in redrafts, I'd rather have Baker Mayfield, which is, I mean, you think like, what? That's crazy. I'm just not a fan.
What's crazy is right now is that Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice are both being drafted as top 20 receivers in dynasty leagues. And if you have 2 top 20 receivers, you would think that your quarterback would be able to put up some massive numbers. But Mahomes just isn't being drafted that way anymore. He's got 5 or 6 quarterbacks that are being drafted ahead of him in dynasty leagues. And again, I understand because the production isn't there. I just wouldn't be surprised after the way last year ended if this isn't a little bit of a revenge tour for Mahomes, because everybody's talking about how great Josh Allen is and Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow. I'm putting it out into the universe right now. I think this is the Mahomes revenge season. That's all.
All right. Well, in about 5 months, we'll find out if you're right or not. Mahomes is just not a guy. He's got more name value than fantasy value at this point. Maybe he turns that thing around this season. Again, I may have a blind spot towards Mahomes. I'm just not a fan.
All right, let's talk about a receiver that is poised for a bounce back season in Pittsburgh. We'll tell you who it is next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. There's nothing like the NBA playoffs, the intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds. It's the kind of atmosphere that you must experience live, and this year's matchups in the playoffs have already been delivering. If you want in, Gametime makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games, and prices on the app actually go down the closer that we get to tip-off. And with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Gametime is a total game changer. I love that I can see my exact view for my seats in the app before you buy. And the app is so easy to use. It's ridiculously simple. 2 taps and I'm done. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We are naming some potential breakout bounce back players for the 2025 season. And let's talk about DK Metcalf, traded from the Seahawks to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now we know who's going to be throwing him the football, Aaron Rodgers. Metcalf, Fabs, right now in Dynasty Leagues, wide receiver 29. You can get him pretty cheap. Sounds like you're all in.
At least for this upcoming season, I am. And he's coming off the worst fantasy season of his career since he was a rookie. I mean, he averaged 12.8 points per game, which was down from like ballpark, like 14 points per game the year before. But I mean, he's going to be a target hog in Pittsburgh. I mean, beyond Metcalf, like give me the Steelers wide receivers, Calvin Austin and Robert Woods and Roman Wilson and Scotty Miller. I mean, there ain't much there. I mean, maybe they make a move. Maybe they add a Keenan Allen. Maybe they acquire an Alan Lazard or something like that. But right now,
well, even if it's Alan Lazard, does Alan Lazard scare you at all from DK?
No, but I mean, Lazard was actually pretty good at times last season. If you remember, he was pretty good last year at times. But I think
if you're a Steeler, if you like DK Metcalf, you know the Steelers are going to go out and get another receiver. You're hoping it's somebody like Lazard,
right?
Who's good but not really threatening.
Right, exactly. And make all the the wheelchair old man walking around in a cane jokes that you want, but bottom line is that look at what Aaron Rodgers has done for wide receivers in his career, and I'll go back to 2008. Greg Jennings, Donald Driver, both top 24 wide receivers. Every single year, basically, that Rodgers has started at least 12 to 14 games, he's had a number one or a very good number two wide receiver when he's had good receivers, right? I mean, like there was, a couple of years ago, like his best receiver was like Christian Watson, and that was not very good. But even last year, Garrett Wilson, and we think of Garrett Wilson, Marcus, as having like not a good year, but he was the wide receiver 10. Yeah. And Devontae Adams was a wide receiver 11, and Rodgers is 41 years old. And when we go back and look, DA has had, how many top 5 wide receiver finishes? Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb, Greg Jennings, Donald Driver. I mean, we can go back and back. And this is a situation now where, like, you even saw before Rodgers signed with the Steelers, because we all kind of knew, and certainly you were talking about it on the pod, that he and DK were like, I don't know if they were playing golf together, or they were hanging out, or they were throwing the ball together. They kind of knew something was going on there. And the one thing that Rodgers can do, and you can, crap on him all you want for whatever, but one thing he could do is produce a very strong fantasy wide receiver. And in redrafts, that's why I moved DK Metcalf up. Now, in Dynasty, I didn't move him up too much because I think it's just a one-year thing, and I don't know where they're going to go with quarterbacks after 2024 or 2025. But, like, here's the deal. This season, DK Metcalf has a shot to be a top 12 wide receiver, and you are not paying a top 12 wide receiver price in drafts.
No, I think from a dynasty perspective, you're right. Like, what's the quarterback situation look like in Pittsburgh, and how well does DK Metcalf's game age? Because I don't think we would call him like a precise route runner or anything like that. Like, I don't think he's going to age like Devontae Adams, where Adams is going to be able to play at a decent level until he's like 36, 37, because he's such a good route runner, where Metcalf's game is all based on size and athleticism. He's always going to be huge, right? But is he going to have the 4.3 speed where he can run by defensive backs? I don't know. But he's 27 years old. I'll worry about that in 4 or 5 years from now, Fabs. Like, it's just not that big of a deal. And the only other question I have is, are we going to see Aaron Rodgers throw the ball about 600 times like we saw with him, what he did with the Jets last year? Or with Mike Tomlin and Arthur Smith, is this going to be a more ball control offense where the passing attempts are down and they try to limit the exposure for Aaron Rodgers? I don't know, but I can bet that DK Metcalf is going to get most of the targets in this passing game because you mentioned it. They're not going to be throwing the ball to Scotty Miller and Darnell Washington and Caleb Johnson all that often. So I'm all in.
No, I am a big fan. And also keep in mind, too, I mean, look at the division he's going to be playing in, for crying out loud. I mean, besides the Cleveland Browns, I mean, the Bengals are going to score points. The Ravens are going to have to, you're going to have to score points to keep up with these teams and certainly some other teams on the schedule. So it's going to be fun to see Rodgers. And in week 1, Jets, just like the NFL wrote a script.
There you go. I got one more guy at receiver that I wanted to mention, Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman is, again, 27 years old. We've seen Michael Pittman be, a 1,000-yard receiver before. We just never really liked him with Anthony Richardson because the accuracy was so poor. Right now, I know they've got other weapons. They got Josh Downs, A.D. Mitchell, Alec Pierce. But I'm kind of assuming that Daniel Jones is going to start most of the season, if not all of the season.
Isn't that crazy?
I know.
My goodness gracious. Yeah.
And I don't listen, I don't love Daniel Jones. I don't think he's a great quarterback, but is he a better pocket passer than Anthony Richardson? Probably. And Michael Pittman's being drafted at wide receiver 42. I think he's the number 1 offense in this Indianapolis offense. He's 27. He's been a really good player before. Could he be wide receiver 28? Like, would it shock you, Fabs, at the end of the year if he's wide receiver 28? Absolutely not.
No. From your mouth to God's ears too, because I have Michael Pittman Jr. in one of my dynasty leagues, and last year was just such an utter disappointment. And going into this season, thinking Anthony Richardson was going to be the starter. I mean, we hearing reports now that maybe he will be ready for training camp, and maybe that's just because he's seeing all these reports of Daniel Jones looks like he's going to be the starter in week 1. He's trying to push things. I don't know, but it is strange, right? From a fantasy standpoint, we've seen this in the past where the backup, the projected backup at least, is going to be a better fantasy quarterback and help the players around him score more fantasy points than the starter. We saw that with Joe Flacco a couple of years ago, right?
Or Jameis last year with the
Browns, right? Exactly. Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's a shame that Jameis is going to be buried on that Giants depth chart. I almost wish he'd go back to New Orleans so I could get some of that Jameis nonsense where, he scores 30 1 week and then 15 and 12 the next 2 weeks, but it's a wild ride and we're not going to see much of that this season.
We should also mention that Michael Pittman played with a pretty severe back injury last year, and he gutted through. I mean, I remember there was a middle point of the season where it was reported that he was going to go on the injured reserve list, miss at least 4 games. And then he ended up playing the next week. Like, he's just a really tough dude. And the fact that he's healthy now, maybe the quarterback situation will get better. I know they added Tyler Warren to make this, passing offense even more complicated to figure out. But I just think he's the best receiver of that group. And I'm willing to take a chance at wide receiver 42. I think he has a bounce back year. Maybe it's not 1,200 yards, double-digit touchdowns, but maybe it's 1,000 touchdowns or 1,000 touchdowns, 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns.
1,000 touchdowns. He's going number 1, man.
1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns, and he's back to being, a weekly flex play.
Yeah, I like 2 years ago he was great, right? Yeah. All the catches. So this is certainly somewhere where he's been in the past, and hopefully he can get back there.
All right, let's talk about a couple tight ends that we think are going to have bounce back seasons in 2025. We will tell you who those players are next. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show. As training camps get closer and moves are being made, hosts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, we are here naming some potential bounce back players for the 2025 fantasy season. Let's get to some tight ends. Who do you got?
Dude, I dig me some Evan Engram. And I get it. Last year was not good at all. He averaged 9.9 points per game. He was injured for a lot of the season. But let's go back 1 year prior. 13.6 points per game. He had over 100 catches. I mean, he was phenomenal. And after he was cut by the Jaguars, he landed, Marcus, in maybe the best spot possible, or at least one of the best spots possible, is in Denver. And first off, with the injuries, he participated in OTAs. He looks like he's 100%. That's obviously a positive. But look at Sean Payton's history with tight ends when he's actually had a guy who can catch the ball. Okay. And we're going to go back to Jeremy Shockey, who posted very good totals in Payton's system. Jimmy Graham was a fantasy superstar in this offense. Ben Watson, not a fantasy superstar in his career, had a huge year in 2015 under Sean Payton. Kobe Fleener, you remember him?
I do.
He had more than 600 yards in this offense in 2016. Jared Cook, who I always will remember for catching a ball on the sidelines against the Cowboys, which this guy could never catch the damn ball, and he caught that one. And then Mason Crosby, and I don't want to get into it. He had 705 yards and 9 touchdowns in 2019 in Sean Payton's offense. This is a very good system for tight ends. And I get it.
Can I give you one more? Well,
go ahead.
Can I give you one more? 2004, when Sean Payton was with our Cowboys. Jason Witten, 980 yards and 6 touchdowns.
Love it. I love it. And the bottom line here is that, yes, the Broncos have like a plethora of young wide receivers, but they don't have anybody beyond Cortland Sutton who you're going to throw out there and say that guy's going to have more targets than Evan Engram, or that guy's going to have more targets than Evan Engram. I don't think so. I think Evan Ingram's going to be at least second in targets on this team, playing that kind of joker type of role. And he's being drafted late. And after last year, some people are down. Why? Because fantasy managers are ultimately, what have you done for me lately? Who sang that song? I can't remember. That was a really good song. Was that Paula Abdul back in the day? I'm dating myself now. But the bottom line here is that Evan Engram is a really good bargain, and the chances of him producing a very good season, I don't know if he's going over 100 catches, probably not. But if he can give me 70 catches for 850 yards and 6 to 8 touchdowns, sign me up.
So I'm going to compare and contrast him to my potential bounce back player. And that's Jake Ferguson, who has been a starting tight end for the Cowboys over the last 2 years. He had a big 2023 season. 2024, he gets hurt in week 1, misses a couple of games, comes back, just never was quite the same after the injury. Dak Prescott goes down after 8 games, and then he's playing with Cooper Rush and Trey Lance. Just a bad season from Jake Ferguson. But now that they have George Pickens, they have CeeDee Lamb, I would expect Ferguson to have a bunch of underneath targets, being the guy that ends up being the chain mover. Of these 2 tight ends, which one would you prefer in your fantasy leagues?
In redrafts, I'm going to go with Engram. In Dynasty, I will probably go Ferguson.
I think I tend to agree. The only thing that's holding me back from saying Engram clearly, and I mentioned this point kind of all offseason, I think this Denver defense is going to be awesome. Whereas I think Dallas's defense might be a little bit of a train wreck to open the year. And that could just make where Dak Prescott is just throwing 40, 45 passes a game. I just don't see that being the case for the Broncos and Bo Nix. And if Dak is throwing the ball 40, 45 times, maybe Ferguson is somebody who, gets 7, 8, 9 targets a week. And there's just not very many tight ends that are going to get that kind of workload, especially early in the season.
Yeah, tight end is super thin this season. And now, when you think about it, we have like 2 really good young tight ends in, Brock Bowers and Trey McBride. But also on the flip side of that, you have some older tight ends who are regressing. Travis Kelce's regressing. Mark Ingram ain't scoring 11 touchdowns again, folks. Let's just say that.
Yeah,
Mark Andrews,
yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
What did I say?
Mark Ingram. He's probably not scoring 11 touchdowns either.
You know what it was? Because I was looking at the New Orleans Saints data, and I was like, Mark Ingram. Thanks for catching that. But yeah, Andrews is not going to have 11 touchdowns. He might have 5 or 6 this upcoming season. So we're seeing some young guys rise up. We're seeing some older guys kind of start to decline a little bit. And so the position still is very, up and down and thin and inconsistent. It's a position where a lot of people decide to punt tight end because they're just like, if I'm not going to get one of these, 4 or 5 players, I'm not going to go there. But Evan Engram and Jake Ferguson, I think, are both very good options if you're not looking to get in a dynasty startup or in a redraft, one of these higher end tight ends.
Yeah, and I think in dynasty leagues, because their prices are so cheap right now, Jake Ferguson, tight end 15, Evan Engram, tight end 17, you could theoretically just roster both and not have to pay anything, and
100%.
maybe just stream those guys kind of based on the matchup, based on maybe what the projected points total is for that game. I don't think that's a worse or a bad strategy at all, especially if you don't have a Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, Sam Laporta. Like, you guys know the names now.
Yep. Yeah. That's it. It's almost like quarterback, right? So if you don't get like one of like the top guys, you can get, I'll say, Dak Prescott and Baker Mayfield,
Sure.
right? You can get some really good quarterbacks, and you could kind of play the matchups with them on a weekly basis. You could do the same thing at tight end.
The last thing I want to ask you before we head out is a lot of production at the tight end position just comes down to who scores the most touchdowns, right?
Sure.
And we saw this with like Sam Laporta during his rookie year compared to year two. Touchdowns are really hard to predict. It can be very fluky. But of these two players, Evan Engram and Jake Ferguson, if you had to pick, which one do you think is the most likely to score, let's say, double-digit touchdowns this year?
Double-digit touchdowns. Well, I mean, wow. Neither.
But, well, I mean, I'm not predicting it. I'm saying which one. If it happens, which one do you? Because that's what we're talking about. If somebody's going to become a top 5 or 6 tight end, they're going to have to score that many touchdowns. Which one do you think
this season? This season, I got to go with Engram.
Okay, I could say I have no problem with it. I wouldn't be surprised if Engram ends up being like the leading target getter for the Broncos inside the 10-yard line. Like that just seems very realistic to me.
And remember, he's kind of like a wide receiver too.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not your prototypical tight end. So that's why he's going to be playing the quote Joker position.
There you go. All right, that is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. On tomorrow's show, we're going to talk about some of the biggest mini camp winners for your dynasty leagues. Make sure you guys tune in for that. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Check out the YouTube channel as well. Follow Fabs on Twitter at Michael_Fabiano. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.